basically, you don't have to look in the lens. You can just kind of look at me. If I look away, it's just because I'm checking the picture. But okay, here's our storyteller field work, Tony Barnacle. Anyway, uh, Tony, you've had a whole lifetime of stories, uh, which I think you've had the most interesting life of anybody I've ever met, myself included. But what I find really particularly interesting is some of the um, some of the interesting events that happen in Africa, that happened to you in Africa, that I think really gave you a very interesting perspective on life. So maybe we can kind of begin with a little bit of a history and how you got to Africa, as a priest of the Roman Catholic Church, and kind of we'll just take it from there.
Well, I've read stories about a planned life and a purposeful life. And if my life was anything, it was anything but planned and purposeful. I can remember, as far back as I can remember, being a worrywart as a kid. I didn't know what I wanted to be when I was growing up. And it was so bad that my mother got a little statue and called the statue a worry bird. It was a funny looking bird. Told me to give my worries to the worry bird every night. I never realized what a psychologist she was. It was an amazing solution. But anyway, my life was very much that way. It was just kind of still wondering, still listening. Some people wanted to be a banker. Some people wanted to be a lawyer, a doctor. And I never knew. I went to engineering school because John Schultz was going to engineering school, and I played basketball with John Schultz. And there I wound up as an engineer. Luckily, I went into the Air Force and broke that career. Came back and realized I didn't want to be an engineer, and didn't know what I wanted to be still. And then one day I just picked up at church by accident the church magazine, and there were all kinds of missionary groups. This was before the Peace Corps. I think if there was a Peace Corps, I might have joined the Peace Corps. But one was interested me in particular, and that was a society whose home base was in London. And I thought, well, if I'm going to be a priest, I don't want people hanging around here that knew I was an engineer and knew I was everything else. So I'd go off in England and learn. And that was the Mill Hill Missionaries, St. Joseph College in Mill Hill. And I was ordained in 1964. And till the day I was ordained, I thought I was going to Burma because I was a pilot and the bishop there wanted a pilot in Burma. And I had read everything about Burma. And I found out I was going to Cameroon. Where's that? From the beginning, it's been a very interesting journey. They scheduled me to go on the SS African Moon, not to go up by air, which is the normal way, but they wanted to bring a lot of cargo with me. So I got on the African Moon, almost. The African Moon left New York City, and I thought we were going to Cameroon, but I found out we were going to Philadelphia. So in Philadelphia, I had friends in Philadelphia. I got off the African Moon and damn near didn't make it back. They told me it was leaving, and a friend drove me, and the pilot boat was pulling out, and luckily our lights caught the pilot boat's lights, the headlights of the car, and the pilot boat came back, put me on, and then I almost missed my step in the weather there, jumping onto the ship. Luckily, somebody grabbed me by the belt and dragged me onto the ship, and there I was on the SS African Moon. Spent Advent of 1964, that would be almost the month of December, on that boat. Arrived in Cameroon, and I was assigned to be a teacher there. I taught for a year, and I wanted to know more about life. And I mean, teaching physics and mathematics at a secondary school, which is a high school, isn't really immersing yourself in Africa. I mean, we had nice apartments, we had nice living conditions, there in the college, and I had, so at any rate, I decided I wanted to get out, and in order to do so, there was a priest in the area there that had a lot of outstations, and he assigned an outstation to me, and I fell in love with the outstation as soon as I heard the name.
Where was the outstation?
This was in the Insaw region of Cameroon, way up 7,000 feet high in the mountains. Beautiful place. And the town's name, the village name, was Kikakalaki. The K4, some of the people called it, Kikakalaki. I just fell in love with that name. And so I began doing what a normal parish priest would do in Kikakalaki. And here comes a lot of stories. The first one, perhaps, and the one that, I'll go back to my thought of a vocation here. Notice I'm not planning any of it. These things are just coming to me.
Yeah, just do stream of consciousness. The chronology is not as important.
Yeah,
as the story.
So here I am in Kikakalaki by one accident after another. And by that series of accidents, I found that diocesan priests were supposed to do a doctrine class for the men. And that night I had been assigned the virginity of St. Joseph. And I thought, well, this is interesting. What am I going to say? And I worked very hard on fatherhood was a relationship. It wasn't necessarily the carnal relationship. It's the relationship of a young man, a young woman, to an older man who takes the role of the father. So I had worked this fervorino up for a nice little talk. And in the middle of it, I looked up and noticed everybody was sound asleep. Well, everybody was only 7 or 8 men, 7 men I think were there. And I stopped talking, and it was an inspirational moment. I just sat there. And the interpreter, Didicus, looked at me, and I signaled to him to not say anything. And pretty soon, William woke up and dropped his rosary beads. They were about as big as golf balls. Woke everybody up, and there was an awkward silence as they were sitting there. And finally I said, well, if virginity of St. Joseph isn't that interesting, let's just declare Joseph a virgin. That's what the church says. And now let's talk about something that's of interest to you. And there was another long, long silence. And again, I vowed I'm not going to talk. I'm going to wait. And finally, Joseph and Kay said, can I pay for my son's school fees with firewood? Now that is a long story, and I could tell that story. But that was 47 years ago, 46 years ago. Today, that credit union has spawned 212 credit unions that have copied the credit union we started there, and they have 336,000 some members, and they have over $250 million in assets and savings. And what is important is all those villages, and Kikakalaki is a good one, all these years has been loaned out about 80%. And people have been borrowing money and taking that money and using it and building their lives over and over and over again.
Can you go from, it's kind of a jump to go from a guy asking if he can pay for his tuition with firewood to the credit union. Can you kind of fill in that gap there, how one led to the other?
Well, it was a slow start. And as I tried years later to define my life in a resume, the person who helped me said, look for one word that would define you. And I searched and searched and searched a whole weekend, and I came out with the word entrepreneur. Today, it's a very common word, but I've realized that I always loved starting things, and seeing them to a certain point, and then it became boring, and I looked for something else to start, or something else to poke, or something else to, stir up. So that started very, very slowly. That doctrine class of 7 men, the teachers one teacher in particular found out about it and came with several teachers. There were 8 days in a week in Kikakalaki and in Saul region. They have, and Kilovi was the day that we had our discussion. And it was also a good day because it was a day that the women went to the market and didn't have to be on the field, and they could come back. And it was a little bit of a vacation day for them. And they could attend. Right? That comes in later. But more men started coming, the teachers started coming, the crowd began growing, and we moved from the church out into the courtyard at the school, where there was a lot more room. People could stand around. Some people would pull chairs out and sit around. And the discussion continued on economics, not on a credit union, on economics, on a dollar and on a subsistence economy and a money economy and what all this meant. And so women started coming. And I can remember in particular one night when there was a tremendous argument going on, and because it was in Lamzo, and I'm not that accomplished in Lamzo language, I could follow most, little conversation, but this was getting out of hand. I asked Michael, the teacher, Michael Banzika, the teacher that first showed the interest, what were they talking about? And he said they're asking if women can join the credit union. And so I thought for a while, and I asked Michael, I said, do the women have any money? And he said, they have most of the money. The men squander the money very quickly. The women save it in their little jangy saving societies, a very primitive but effective way of saving money. And I said, well, it seems to me that there's an apparent answer to that question. If the women have the money, maybe they should be in the credit union. Well, there was. It didn't happen right away, but it was a charter, in the charter of the first credit union it would be allowed. Well, they still didn't know they were going to do a credit union, and I had heard about a credit union in another village that is actually the first one, but never had replicated itself the way we did in Kikakalaki. But we sent some men to a delegation to that credit union, and they came back very encouraged by what they saw. And so the credit union became now the center of the discussion. The discussion went on more weeks, and it grew and it grew and it grew until finally the demand to start the credit union was overwhelming. Now, consider, there's no law in Cameroon for credit unions. There's no bylaws in credit unions. And there's certainly no protection, no insurance. So I've got a few of the Western culture reserves about this thing, but they're insisting on going. So they formed the credit union. We had our first meeting. We put in money. I kept the money at first, and then we found an old tabernacle and embedded it in a wall in the safe of their. It made a safe out of the embedded in the wall of their community building, and we went on. Well, they made their first loan. Unfortunately, let's go back to the first night. Everybody put in a few thousand francs, including myself. 2,000 francs was $8. So that, to give you if I put in 2,000 francs or 3,000 francs, it was $8 or $12. I can't remember. But that was a normal contribution until we got around to Pa Thomas Toomey. And this old man in his 70s, anyway, he had been a bricklayer for me, pulled out of his his African robe, a wad of money over 40,000 francs. It was his life savings. And I wanted to kick him under the, I said, Thomas, for God's sake, don't believe golden mouth Tony. You know, this can be, you know, this is your life savings. But that would not have deterred Thomas. He saw the value of this, and he was putting all of his money into it. Well, the worst fears of the bishops and many other priests and other people told me would happen, happened. Somebody's going to steal the money. And sure enough, they loaned almost all of that money, all of Thomas's money and all little bit we put in, to one trader who literally went south. He went down to the port cities south of where we were and did not return. And one night, the delegation came to me, and men, the same ones that started it so enthusiastically, now downcast, they told me the story. My liberal, white background urged me to go to the safe, tell Father Nealon I wanted to take money out of our college safe, borrow it. I would get my friends to support Father Tony Friends in St. Louis to send the money and replace it. Against that urging, I said, let's go the whole way. Let's do some really tough love. And I said, I'm going to say it in pidgin English. No be how now we to talk say this thingy be dasso like school, where una go learn something. Well, yes, they said. Well, una just paid your school fees. This is your school fees. You paid for it. They did not go away happy that night. But it took about a week later, when there was a stir in the village, and I found out that the money was recovered with interest, fully recovered with interest. And I did a chart in the, on a wall there early on to chart the growth of that credit union. And it had been poking along month by month. But after that money came back in, it soared up. And what happened? I asked Michael again. The women came and put their money in the credit union. They had been watching it to see if this is one more game the men were playing on them. And when they were assured that this thing was real, that they would collect bad loans, it grew. And it grew, and it grew regularly. The Department of Cooperatives got very interested in it. A man by the name of Simon Shang contacted me, came out to visit with me. He was the head of the Department of Cooperatives for the country. And he wanted me to write the bylaws. Well, I found out Tanzania had bylaws and said they're an English-speaking country, so I wrote and got the bylaws from Tanzania and just simply changed the nouns and turned that in, and I'm the author of the of the bylaws. Then we grew. More and more people began copying us until we had 13 credit unions. And with 13 credit unions, we had a league meeting. A league meeting in the major town in the area, which was Bamenda. We've had several seminars in that time, which were always growth times. And I was upset with Simon Shang because at the last moment he brought in some credit unions that I never knew about, and I don't think I'd had any training and had any kind of thing. And at that time I had taken a very proprietary interest in this thing, and I really dumped on him. And he said, I think you'll find out in time why I did this. Well, I found out in that meeting. At that meeting, the Insall region would have had 6 credit unions, and the outside of Insall would have had 5 credit unions that were, or maybe 4. And so without the 3 that came in, when the 3 that came in, the Insall Credit Union did not have the majority. Yes, it was 6 and 6, whatever it was they brought in, so that so that with the new credit unions, it came out 6 and 6. Thank you. Uh, the the
If you want to drink your coffee,
no, that's fine.
you can keep this informal.
Okay.
You know.
Good. Thank you. There was even warm.
Good coffee.
No, it's
Let me
well.
ask you,
When it was 6 and 6,
Yeah.
I found out, even though people that I knew and saw, and that's the area that we started this thing, credit union, were very, very weary about this one man. They put him up to be the president. And they voted as a block of 6. Had Shang not brought in these extra credit unions, the outside group could not have blocked it with a 6 and 6 vote. And they went first ballot, second ballot, third ballot, it still was locked, 6 and 6. Until one of the men that was nominated as president from Minnesota came up and said to Simon Shang in Lamzo, enough that I could understand, it's up to you to decide. And this was Simon Shang was from that tribe. And he said in Lamzo to his brother, and if I do, my brother, you will be unhappy. And with that, they knew that they had to negotiate, and they negotiated an outsider to be the president and the man from Minnesota to be the vice president. That outsider that I didn't know was so good that when he represented the credit unions in Nairobi at a first meeting of the Association of Credit Unions, he became the first president of the All-African Association of Credit Unions. Benedict Mukong is his name, and he traveled the world in that role, right out of this little thing. Well, after that, we had people bringing in money like you can't believe. In fact, again, what kind of a life opened up to me that I didn't even pick and choose, but it was, I knew nothing about credit unions when we started this. And I tried to get the U.S. ambassador in the early days to give some money. And I got nothing back but letters, what is a credit union, and all kinds of, and stuff that I just threw away. I thought, this is ridiculous. Then my sister, again, another accident, my sister sent me in the mail a copy from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch of Bob Payton, the dean at Washington University, was appointed to be the ambassador to Cameroon. And she told me that her friend Margie was Bob's secretary, that he had a very adverse feeling about missionaries and what they had done, and that he liked to climb mountains, and he loved Falstaff beer. I had those 3 facts. And this is something that I've always found out, the entrepreneur in me, I would be willing to do all kinds of things, legal or illegal, to get what I wanted. I found out about 2 months later that on his maiden tour around the country, the ambassador to Cameroon was coming to Banzo, to Kumbo town in Banzo, where our school was. He didn't, and the news story that I got was that he was going to visit the Baptist hospital, and he was going to visit with the district officer, and he was going to visit with the fawn, the chief of the area. But not with Tony Barnacle, citizen of the United States and teacher at St. Augustine's College. So I said, what am I going to do? I found out he was coming in on this day. We're on the ring road. You can come from Bamenda from the south on the ring road, or you can come from Nkambi on the north on the ring road. There's only 2 ways to come into the area. So I hired 2 policemen, off-duty policemen, told them to get their little putt-putts, the motor scooters that they had, put on full uniform, and when they saw a car coming with this flag, and I showed them the American flag, they knew who that flag was, said, stop the car and bring them immediately to me. I would pay them a full day's salary for just going out to fetch that car. It would be sometime after noon before it would arrive from either side. So I said, you just, work a half a day and you'll catch him. And the one who brings him gets a second day's salary. Well, it was raining. It was rain season, and the rain was pouring down, and I thought, will this work? And I looked up, and I saw this little policeman coming on his putt-putt, and behind it an entourage of 3 Land Rovers with American flags. And he pulled them in and stopped, and they, of course, went in obediently, and I opened them and said, welcome, come on in. And I could tell some of the aides were looking at their thing, where in the hell are we? What's this on the road? Have we been hijacked? And they all came in and had tea. And then the ambassadors said, I understand you're going to have dinner tonight with Mrs. Fager at the Baptist Hospital. He said, yeah. I said, you'll get one of the best American meals you can possibly get anywhere in Cameroon. She pitches a wonderful chicken dinner. I said, the only thing she won't have is a beer. And I pointed to our refrigerator, our gas-driven refrigerator, and I said, there in that refrigerator is a load of Falstaff beer waiting to be drunk. So you're welcome to come up afterwards and have a beer with me. Oh, he said, looked at Polly, his wife, and he said, I think I'll take you up on that. So, and then that night, up he comes down, just their Land Rover. The rest of the entourage is gone, and they came up and had a beer with me. Well, I told him that I was mistaken. We had Heinekens and we had Beaufort, the African beer. We didn't have any Falstaff in there. So, but anyway, it didn't matter. Beer was beer was beer. A beer drinker drinks beer, and we had a couple of beers. And in the middle of having a couple or 3 beers, he had to do what people who drink beer had to do. He had to go to the John. And I said, is it a long call or short call? And he said, it's a short call. And I said, follow me. And I walked him out onto our veranda and into the courtyard there. And across, now the rain had stopped, I can remember a full moon shining down on Mount Aku. And as we were peeing, I told Bob, I said, there is my restroom. And he laughed, and I said, and over there, that mountain is the highest crater mountain lake in West Africa. Now that was true. I wouldn't like the Falstaff, that was true. And I said, it gets up around 9,000 feet, and there's a beautiful lake up there on the top of it. Do you ever think of climbing something that, knowing full well he loved it? And he said, yes. He said, I think I could. I said, there would be a time you could, I'd take you up there. And he said, well, Wednesday would be good. And so I said, okay, I'll meet you staying at the rest house. I'll pick you up at the rest house, you and Polly, and we can go. And I made arrangement with the priest in Jotun to have a little petit déjeuner there, and then we would climb the mountain, and when he came back down, he'd have a curry dinner for us. So that was arranged. Going up the mountain, I said to Bob, I guess it's nice for an ambassador to have a day off. And he said, an ambassador never has a day off in the host country. I mean, that sounded right out of the manual. And I looked at him and I said, bullshit. And he laughed and he said, call me Bob, and this is Polly. And I said, and please stop calling me Father Barnacle. My name is Tony. So Bob and Tony and Polly walked up the mountain. Polly waited while Bob and Tony stripped and went swimming in Aku Lake, put our clothes back on and walked down. And only then did I tell him about this credit union and the application I had handed in. And I had never gotten back a sufficient answer from the ambassador's fund. And he said, I'll look into it. He went away. About a week later, I got a wire from a guy named Felix Lipinski telling me that he was coming to the Belo airport, which was about a half a day drive from us, on the 3 o'clock plane, and I was to meet him there. And I had, at the time, I had asked for $3,000 or $4,000 for $1,000 for each credit union that had been started. Well, by now we had 13 credit unions. So I drove to Belo, and I thought, well, maybe we'd just carry on the discussion. And the plane, a two-engine prop plane, stopped, took